Why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll call the ARPA committee meeting to order officially. Thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate it. So our focus today is going to be a continuation of the discussion we had before about dividing our committee into smaller working groups, the purpose of which is idea generation. And this is both among the working group members, committee members, but also just taking ideas from the public based on our connections and networks. The thought here is that we would try to assemble a collection of those ideas, and then as a next step, try to prioritize and assign economic value to some of those ideas, both in terms of how much in ARPA funds they would consume, but also what the financial impact for the town would be. And then finally decide on how to both get public input and present these ideas to the public and get public input, and what the process should be like that before we come to a final recommendation that we would deliver to the Board of Selectmen. So that's just a reminder of sort of where we are in the process. So today, what I'd like to do is just kind of hear from each committee and in terms of what their thinking is so far, what ideas they have, and then also what they'd like to do or what help they'd like to get from this committee and sort of where we are in this process. And it could be that we have enough ideas and we're ready to study them specifically in terms of costing and prioritization, or it could be that we just don't have enough ideas and we need to somehow figure out how to cast a wider net, and we can talk about that as well. Administratively, the only thing we need to do is approve the minutes from the December 14th meeting, which Linda included in her calendar invite. And of course, we need to set up our next meeting. We don't have minutes yet. I guess, Kate, you don't have those yet from the January 4th meeting. We'll just approve those later. So, Kate, have I left anything out?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So as I said in my email, we've got these three committees. It's infrastructure with Dan, Ed, and Martha, health with Kevin, David, Mark, Ali, Frank, and Bill. And then there's the esteemed and highly desirable everything else committee, which we've restricted membership to, despite clear interest from the group, to myself, Kate, and Jen. And the three of us met, and I can talk a little bit about that. Why don't we start, if I could hand the microphone over to Dan and team, and maybe you guys could just tell us where you are on infrastructure or what you think and where things stand.
Sure. So Martha, just jump in anytime. I don't think we have Ed yet. Ed's at a conference, I think in Boston. He was going to try to make this work, but perhaps he wasn't able to.
I don't see him in here.
So infrastructure as defined by ARPA is different than infrastructure as I think a layperson or the town might define it. Infrastructure as defined by ARPA is limited. It's water, sewer, broadband. So paving, roads, those things, they might be able to be dealt with ARPA funds, but not through the infrastructure bucket. Kate, I think I had that right. Yeah, so basically what we're looking at is, I think broadband is not applicable to our town. I think our residents have access. We don't have an issue with broadband in town. So it's really water, sewer, and that is squarely public works. So I think Martha and I did spend some time talking to colleagues, looking at what other towns have been doing. But I think all that, from my perspective, what Gentile believe and it's scheduled.
Hey, Dan, you're breaking up and in and out on your microphone. I don't know if you touched something, but we're having a little trouble hearing you now. Could you recheck?
Is that any better?
It was great before. It's hard to hear now, though.
I think Ed has joined us.
Okay, I'm going.
Yeah, I'm here, Kate.
I'm turning Bluetooth off, and hopefully that helped. Did that help?
We can hear you. It's okay.
I can hear you fine now.
Okay, and it sounds like Ed has joined. Okay, right on cue. So as I was saying, I think hopefully you've heard, ARPA infrastructure is water, sewer, broadband. Broadband's not really applicable for our town. So water and sewer seem to be the projects that we're focused on. That is squarely public works. So we turned to Ed and said, what are the projects that you can schedule that need funding. The good news about these projects are they're projects that the town needs. These are not optional. Well, I guess everything is optional, but these are projects that would be coming before the town, regardless of whether they're funded from the general fund, the capital fund, or ARPA funds. So I circulated, John, to you a schedule that Ed had put together. I don't know if the full committee has that, but I would ask Ed to walk through that schedule. And I'll just pause there to see if people do have it or we should distribute it quickly.
Yeah, why don't you send it around? My bad. I should have forwarded that and didn't realize the whole committee wasn't copied. So
You might screen share it while Ed talks.
Yeah, easier said than done. I've never done that. I don't know how. I don't know how.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm going to make you a co-host. All right.
Pardon?
I'm going to make you a co-host.
Okay.
Okay. And then at the bottom of your screen,
Yep.
look like next to the chat button. Do you see a green thing that says share screen?
Yes.
Click on that.
So first of all, I want to pull up. I don't have the schedule on this
Oh.
screen. I have it on my iPad. So
Do you want to email it to me and I'll share it?
Yes. Thank you. Much better idea. It just went.
Okie dokie. Okay.
Ed, are you on to walk through this list?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. So you're just, I think you're on audio. Your schedule of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items, starting with Old King Highway pipelining, is on the screen.
Okay. It's on my little phone screen right now too. So I'll put my glasses on just to help with this one. I'll go through them. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly. I mean, a lot of this you folks either know about or know they're coming, but let's talk about the biggest one. The most priority that I have is the Old Kings Highway pipelining and the sanitary sewer. We did get a very preliminary estimate from our consultant. I did put a description in there to kind of give you a flavor for what this project entails. 3,500 linear feet of cured in place pipelining, 18 manholes. You guys can all read this. 40 service connectings, 18 manhole replacements. So that is a large project, but it's also a critical project. And I think stay in the guidance of the water, wastewater area, this project just hits home on all the points. We are currently in the design phase. I want to implement this in April or May of this year. I want to get going. It's going to take about 3 months to complete, possibly 4, depending on weather. So that would be my first one. And please stop me if you have any questions, or I'll continue to go. Okay. Okay. Can you folks hear me still?
Yep.
Okay. Next one is the Grove Street Tilly Pond drainage upgrades. We are doing a study now. We know there's capacity issues down in this area. So I put a very, very rough estimate. This is my estimate. It's nothing other than based on pure knowledge of the area and my background in doing some estimating, but I threw into what a description would be for your storm drainage piping and larger pipes, rerouting. We already have a system in place. We may have to mimic it and so on. Salt box coach lamp drainage, same thing. We do have a ongoing study right now. It is still scheduled to be completed by April, this study. It will propose, I'm assuming it will propose upgrades in those areas. One of the the key features is taking the water down to Long Island Sound, or to Holly Pond, if you will. That's what you're looking at in regards to a description, upgrading the pipes to larger pipes, going across the post road and all the way to Holly Pond. And now, again, very rough estimate. I don't have anything other than lengths, distances, and pipe costs to tell you that it's going to cost $1 to $1.5 million. Rings End Road Bridge repair. I have an estimate from a consultant who did the inspections on the bridge already. We're going to repoint some of the abutments and wing wall areas. We have to replace some of the riprap over the exposed footing. So that was a hard estimate from an engineer, not bid yet. Old Kings Highway Bridge repair. Again, same consultant, did the inspection, came up with a cost estimate for us, engineer's cost estimate. Description is in place there. We have some pavement resurfacing to replace, deteriorating concrete on the underside and to coat it with epoxy, mill and overlay, patch some of the slab work, install some waterproof membrane over the bridge to eliminate a lot of the intrusion of water into the slab that's there, causing the deterioration of the concrete underneath. Next project will be Camp Avenue. Again, same consultant did the inspection for us, quickly provided us with a cost estimate. Description there, pretty much the same. You're going to see, so a lot of these bridges have infiltration of water through their construction, or I'm sorry, concrete slab, which causes it to deteriorate. They're calling for some epoxy work, patching of concrete surfaces. Not a large number, but again, it's going to need to be done. As Dan had mentioned originally, these are projects that I know are slated to be going in front with capital and requests. So I put them on this list. And the last one is the Long Neck Point drainage. We have a low area down there causing icing, flooding issues. It's not much of a project. We originally thought that we would buy the material and do the work ourselves. But what we saw in front of you right now is a $45,000 cost estimate to have a contractor come in, put the pipe in the ground, repave, and leave. Project there is about 175 linear feet of 12-inch PVC pipe and some catch basin work. So that is my list. I'm here to answer any questions you may have on that.
John, that totals approximately 3.7 million. And again, the advantage of these projects is they're not really discretionary, and they address one of the critical issues facing the town, which is stormwater management. So I'll just stop there.
Kate, are any of these in your bonding capital expenditure proposal from last night?
No,
Okay. And so you must not have had these as priority one projects, or am I missing something?
no, they hadn't been submitted as a project in the budget.
Okay.
And which of these projects would be done, say, from the sewer fund as opposed to the general fund or capital fund? And would any of them normally be picked up by the adjacent street people?
All right. I can tell you the very first one is if the money does not come from ARPA, I'll be using the $2.3 million bonding that I have for our I&I study. This is basically part of the work that we're going to be doing. We found this during our study and evaluation of our system. So that very first project will be taken from the sewer bonding. Frank, I think you're asking, are there any participating private owners? The only one I really can't answer to is the Grove Street Tilly Pond one. I don't know if there's going to be participating costs.
I think, Ed, he
From
was
the
referring
private
to, would we assess them like we do for sewer expansion?
Yeah, that's right, Kate.
And the answer is no. None of
Oh,
these
that's
are
good.
applicable.
That's a good answer, Kate. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Ed, are there any other priority projects that were discussed or that you'd even like to see added to this list, or is this really your hot list, if you will?
I struggled with that, John. And I think about it every day. Am I missing something? And I think Dan and Martha will tell you. I begged them at the beginning, if you think of something I'm missing, please. I'm not a proud guy. Tell me I missed something, but I can't think of anything that's more critical right now than sanitary sewer and our stormwater impacts, that I'm aware of. You know, there's some outlying studies that we're doing that I don't know if there's going to provide us information that says we need to do some more work. I did put this list together based on what I do know and what I did see over the last couple of years here in town. I thought would be critical to addressing. And to your point, Kate doesn't have these as capital yet. We did get a lot of this information as we were going through the capital process, but if we don't get ARPA money for them, you will see them start to trickle and filter in to our capital plan.
It's really a timing difference, right, Ed? These are, the large ones are consultant driven and we don't have the specific numbers yet, but once we have those specific numbers, they would be falling into the capital budget. Is that fair?
That's correct. That's correct. And I think two of them I have bridge evaluation money which was available and I used it to do these studies, which is going to drive us repairs and then capital improvement estimates, which will go into next year's capital plan. A couple of those locations: Camp Avenue, Old Kings Highway, and Rings End. All three of those locations.
Okay.
This is Martha. The only other thing I would share, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ed, but the Old Kings Highway lining is part of really the overall water infiltration project. And ultimately, we will end up sending less water to Stamford to process. And I think CCM was asking us to do projects, look at doing something on a regional basis in some sense will help, you know, Stamford be less overwhelmed in really big storm events if we're sending less water to them, keeping the sound cleaner, et cetera. So that's sort of that button, I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Frank, go ahead. Martha, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that it's important to see that vision of what we're doing, you know, regionally, of course, but with that Old Kings Highway one, it was part of the study that we were doing that brought this to light. I can tell you, it wasn't on my radar that we'd be doing 3,500 linear feet of Old Kings Highway. But this is why we do the study. This is why we, you know, prioritize. This is why we had the money in place and ready to go in case something like this came up. But these ARPA funds are going to help do not only this project, but what else that we do find or what else we believe can cut down on flows going to Stamford. So it's going to expand our immediate approach to prioritizing our I&I and what we're sending to Stamford's treatment plant to not only reduce our costs, but the stress on their facility.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd mention on this is something I need to take up with Monica and the Board of Selectmen is I want to make sure that these investments or projects that have a flood mitigation feel to them are part of a coordinated effort to think about flood mitigation and repairs in the town. And I don't think we have that just yet. I mean, these are all great things. I'm not saying we need to do them, but I just want to make sure they're in the context of a more holistic view about all this so that when people look at it, they say, not only do they agree with this, but they say, I understand how this fits into the broader scheme and our overall strategy for this, but more to come on that. I'm not saying it should hold any of these efforts back.
And one more question for me. Are there any state or federal funds that would be available for these projects?
I am not aware of any at this moment, Frank.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I-
Go ahead.
I have a question.
Sure.
Mostly Ed, are the town sewage plans up to date?
Okay, you have to help me with that. Can you say that again, please?
Well, I'll give you an example. I live on Post Road, and about maybe 4 years ago, I did a safety valve thing. You're all familiar with that thing. And it turns out that there's a sewage pipe, a town sewage pipe from Post Road to Old Kings Highway. The town didn't have it on their blueprints, if you will. Somebody from Town Hall, from Public Works actually came down and they drew it in. So a lot of these Post Road and Old Kings Highway developments from 50, 60, 70 years ago, I wonder if we already have them up to date on the Public Works computer systems? And if not, can we use some of the ARPA funds to update or upgrade those systems?
Well, I can tell you, and I'm sorry I don't recognize the voice, so you tell me who I'm speaking with.
Bill, Darian
Jepson.
Toybook, sorry.
All right, Bill, thank you. What we do have is, and what we are doing as we're going through the study with our consultant right now, we are updating our plans, and we are getting on GIS. We are putting data points in for this. So we are basically the $700,000 fee is part of it is GIS. It's part of it getting our records up to a standard that we believe is a lot better than we stand right now with it.
Right. All right.
I appreciate that. That's very good input, Dan, and the rest of the infrastructure team. That's terrific. Thank you. Why don't we turn to unless Dan, you had anything else to add?
No, that's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Why don't we turn to the health team? I know, Kevin, do you want to pick up for that team and let us know what you guys are thinking?
Thanks, John. Last week, Frank, Ellie, Mark, David, and I, Bill, my sincere apologies. I inadvertently left you off of it. When we created these meetings, I was writing furiously, and I must have missed your name, but I will include you, of course, going forward. So the team looked at kind of under the health response preparedness piece. We looked at the approved buckets for project funds, and we identified a couple preliminary projects, one priority project, which we would need as a capital project regardless of ARPA funds, just like the previous report out, and is critical, is the replenishment and enhancement of the equipment and supplies we use to support our vaccine clinics. We could use them to if the next health emergency, to distribute medicine, test kits, PPE, masks, gloves, those type of clinics. It's not a lot of money. It's the type of things that you absolutely need to pre-purchase and have standing by. You don't want to be scrambling for these things. So it's like a cache of equipment to quickly stand up our points of dispensing as per our plan. Nick, David, Mark, and myself are going to start putting together and reviewing costs of these supplies. Again, it's essential to support our public health response. This is stuff we've used to support our current COVID initiatives and stuff that we will need to replenish, and then kind of forward thinking what other things will we be used that would be good to have in order to support our response. We had discussed a couple health department projects and initiatives. The next step for me is really to further flesh out some of the scoping and the preliminary costs of these projects. And Frank distributed to the group. John, I think you were on it too. A meeting, I believe it's on the 2nd of March, to get some public input. And those are the next steps. John, unless any questions.
I think that's very helpful. So on the equipment and supplies idea, the idea is to have something that really, it's not something that expires, right? It's sort of health-related assets we can put in place that we can leave there for a long time. Maybe not eternally, but just that they would not be something that would expire, that we'd have to continually replenish.
You could get things that expire and put them into rotation, but I think the idea is to yes, to your point, not get things that are perishable or expire. We could get a small supply of PPE that has a long shelf life that we could actually put in a stock rotation where the first box comes into us, and then when a new stock comes in, we push that last box out to post 53 or somebody else who needs it, so they don't expire. So we'd have to think about that. But yes, you are generally correct that this is stuff, barrier tape, chairs, tables, pads, pens, all the things that we would need to support a clinic.
Right. And did you guys discover or discern anything in particular about our health-related response to this that was slow or not as quick as we would have wanted, that maybe an investment like this would speed things up or enable us to just act in a much more quickly or in a more coordinated way? So I'm thinking about things like communication or just tents and equipment to put things quickly, just deploy things for public access, that type of thing. Was there anything like that that came up in your discussions?
I think there was, this equipment would certainly make the plan that we have more efficient. And then there were a number of lessons learned as we went through this whole process of, responding to and standing up these COVID clinics that you didn't really think of. So I think it's a little bit of both, John. I think it's making our response more efficient. We did have a lot of this stuff in our plan. We had to scramble to find some other stuff, but I think there's also lessons learned. We have this we have to enter every single person into the state online vaccine portal. So scrambling to find computers, printing out the FAQs for vaccines, would have been nice to have a printer on hand dedicated to the cause. So just some minor tweaks, John, that would have made this process a bit quicker, and probably stuff that 5 years ago we didn't know to think of.
Okay, and then I guess my last question: are there any other ideas, maybe outside the kind of directly COVID related ideas that you've discussed here that you guys have considered? And then more broadly, do you feel like you need maybe other sources of ideas that would help you cast a wider net?
We're fleshing out a couple. David has a couple of ideas for his staff and for the health department that I either this week or next need to connect with David to get some more details and put some meat on that bone.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the health committee?
John. John, one thing that came out of a discussion with Ally and myself is granting money to support mental health. I think we have assets in town that we could perhaps grant some decent funding to make accessible means to social workers, et cetera. Center for Hope, for instance. That was one idea. And another idea, to get back to infrastructure, I'm sorry, but my other hat, the fire safety hat, I don't know if anything's ever been considered about expanding the water mains in town to try to provide a level of fire safety, if you will, to our public. Many of the people in the non-hydrant area pay exorbitant fees for fire insurance. And since infrastructure is a key, I don't know if that would fold into that mix. And we could grant money to Aquarian to do that work, but that's just a thought.
Okay. Plus all the hats that you wear, isn't that a fire hazard too? Or just checking?
It's worn my hair off, I can tell you that much.
Excellent. No, that's interesting. The water main expansion point, particularly around hydrants, I've wondered whether we've done enough of that to make sure there's adequate fire protection capacity for all these new developments. I'm assuming that box is checked, but I've never really formally asked that question. So,
well, and to get into that, but it also goes into other avenues, is I agree with you. The infrastructure is old by any standard, same as the drainage. With the developments, Aquarian's a little slow to react. Our region is probably the highest user of water, domestic water in the entire state. So Aquarian is looking at expanding the flows down to this area, but I think we're talking decades before we actually see any real movement. And Perhaps they'll look at doing it in areas that we don't have mains in already. The town, for most part, is about 3/4 fire hydrant protected. The rest of it is not, and it's really two main roads that divide the non-hydrant from the hydrant, and that's Brookside Road and Hollow Tree, the upper portions.
Okay. All right, then. Great, thank you. Anything else from the health team?
Just one question, and this might be into the next groups, but what about donating to the local nonprofits? Is that something the next group is going to talk about?
Yeah, we've got that on our list, thanks. Okay, so I guess the Everything Else Committee. So Kate, Jen, and I spoke, I guess, last week or so and talked about a few things. One general theme, I think, from our discussion was that town projects are ready-made for ARPA funding in the sense that we've got professionals who've thought about them for a long time. So there's not something we have to sort of just dream up. It's been something that's either on our list or something we've considered for a long time. So I think that's good. The other good thing about using ARPA funds for this is that to the extent they reduce the taxpayer burden for making these investments, it benefits everyone in town. So it's not like we're spending ARPA money to target particular groups. It really is helping everyone by reducing the overall tax burden to invest in those projects. So that was kind of one theme. Kate forwarded along a few ideas that we heard in advance of our call, and you can see them in the note that I sent. I'll just read through them briefly. A lot of them have to do with upgrades to our video conferencing capabilities. So, excuse me, making room 206 handicap accessible, which it's not because of the platform where the dais kind of sits up there. And then improving our ability to do kind of hybrid meetings with the RTM so that they could have folks join in person, but also participate by video simultaneously. My understanding is that's hard to do now. There also have been some suggestions on improvements related to our fire departments. I think most of these are actually in your capital budget request for this year, Kate, which include the bunk and workroom at the Rutland Fire Departments and portable classroom at the drill tower, and then some repairs at the heights, that kind of thing. So those are examples, again, of town projects that we could take on, much like the infrastructure list that Dan provided. So except for the ones that I think are on the Kate's capital list, I don't know that we've, excuse me, priced the rest of these, but they are all, I think, good candidates for consideration in that regard. So I don't know, Kate or Jen, do you want to add to that?
No, I think you said it. What we were thinking of was projects that could impact taxpayers as a whole. And I liked Jen's analogy that, when you do electrical work on your house, you need to do it, but you really don't get any sense of fulfillment or joy out of doing that in your house. So we need to do the infrastructure improvements, and I wholeheartedly support that. But I think we should give the residents some things that are much more visible, improving the parks, or, work at the firehouses. These are things that, they'll see and they'll also benefit from for a long time to come.
Yeah, I've thought about that too. The idea of doing needed projects that aren't fun or cool or kind of publicly obvious versus maybe projects that are fun and cool and obvious, right? Just in the sense that people could look at it and say, wow, that's really improved some aspect of the town in a material and visible way. And we can see that it was ARPA funding that made that possible. So I think just considering that trade-off between dull, boring, and necessary and cool and interesting and visible, I think sounds kind of political, but I think there's value in considering that so that people could actually see some of those improvements. I'd point out further that a lot of the infrastructure that we've discussed has minimal impact on taxpayers in any one year. All that stuff's going to get bonded over 20 plus years. And so in a sense, even if we did all of them with no ARPA funding, the impact on taxpayers next year is actually going to be quite minimal. Whereas ARPA funding that's used to replace current spending on eligible projects, that is going to have a much greater impact on taxpayers. So I don't know, something to to consider as we kind of move forward. At the bottom of my note, I forwarded a few emails that we received as part of all this. So Ally, to your point, one of those emails is from Janet King, and she talks about in her note where she says that she met with some folks, and this was kind of the one that Frank forwarded about the volunteer hub through the community fund and whether we could support those guys. I got another note from a gentleman. Sorry. This gentleman, Richard Liverano. So he's the manager of institutional giving at Liberation Programs Incorporated in Norwalk, which is a substance use and treatment and prevention agency. Anyway, I think these kind of fall into the category of donating our ARPA funds outside of Darien to help others. I'm not saying we donate all of it, but it might not be a bad idea to consider at least allocating part of those funds to maybe help a local charitable effort that might have a presence in Darien, or one like this gentleman has proposed from Norwalk to help those folks there. So the only other one that was suggested, Craig Flaherty sent a note that said, as a town citizen, I would like the ARPA committee to consider bonus pay for teachers and Board of Education staff, as I believe their jobs were uniquely difficult during the pandemic. New Canaan has approved $1,000 bonuses for their Board of Education staff, and Stanford's considering $500 for their staff. And he forwarded some articles. So anyway, those are some things we've not discussed on this particular call, which is bonuses for education staff and just this sort of charitable notion as part of how we would spend ARPA funds. Let me stop there and see if anybody has any reactions.
Yeah, John, the Board of Ed is getting its own funding.
Yeah, I know they've got a
ARPA,
separate.
so
we could leave that to them. I think that's right. Okay.
John, I just wanted to clarify a comment you made regarding bonding. Bonding doesn't take the cost off the taxpayer. It just,
spreads it out.
The nature of the cost to the taxpayer, right? So there's still a cost to the taxpayer of bonding a project. It's just lessens the next year or immediate year tax impact.
No, I assure you, I totally get that.
No, I know you do. I
do understand that.
Public watching this understands that subtlety.
Yeah, I'm just saying that if all of these projects were going to be bonded anyway, we could not have to do that bonding because it was all paid for by ARPA money, but the actual impact on the taxpayers would have been less than the actual total amount of ARPA funding next year, right? It's spread out over 20 years. So that's all I'm saying.
Yes.
Good point. Other reactions, questions?
If possible, I'd like to be involved with, deciding or at least give you some input about the nonprofits that do help Darien residents, particularly with food insecurity since COVID began. I mean, person to person, obviously. Also, there's a program in Norwalk called Filling in the Blanks that we are now participating in, which gives food to low-income children for the weekends. Family centers, like Mark mentioned, they have a 6-week waiting list for people to get therapy because it's hard for them to retain therapists. Same with child guidance. So there's quite a few, but I think I personally think that would be a wonderful thing to do, to be able to contribute to them, because they've been essential helping us through this crisis.
And not to put work on your plate, but given your expertise and perspective, would you mind actually coming up with a proposal?
Sure.
And just some suggestions as to some of those groups that we might consider. Be expansive and just say, here's my list, and you can even prioritize it, but that would just give us a range of those types of options to consider.
Yes, be happy to.
And Ally, if you could touch base a little bit with Janet on the HSPC meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great point. Yep, that's great.
Yes, community fund too. We already mentioned community fund, but obviously they help us a lot too.
Yeah, I was just going to make that same point, that the community fund, and Frank is on the board, I think he chairs the board of the community fund, but is in touch with dozens of agencies serving Darien and our contiguous towns, and they assess how well those agencies perform their mission. So I think it'd be helpful to get their feedback and guidance. Ultimately, the decision will be this committee's, but there's a lot of knowledge and information there that can help us make a more well-informed recommendation.
Perfect. Okay. This has been a pretty productive conversation. I really appreciate it. Before we get into kind of administrative and next steps, any other, excuse me, any other questions, suggestions, comments for the group? Okay. So administratively, a couple of things. I think our next meeting should be a continuation of that discussion. And what I'd recommend is maybe each committee try and prioritize a little bit. I think, Dan, you've done a good job there, and I've got a great list. I think if the health group could maybe prioritize their list as well and get a sense for where they'd like to focus. On the everything else committee, Ally will get your input as well, and we'll try to throw some numbers against the few proposals that we've got down there. But I think the idea would be that if we had a list of all our ideas in a single spreadsheet with a sense of priorities and even a ballpark cost figure would be interesting to kind of consider at our next meeting. Maybe Kate and Jen, you could help compile all that from the various groups, but maybe what we'll do is reconvene, say 2 weeks from now. That'll give each committee a chance to sort through that, maybe have other discussions and submit their information to Kate and Jen so that you guys could kind of assemble a single schedule of sort of by committee of what we've got. Does that make sense as a next step? Okay. So then the two other things, we do need to approve our minutes from the December meeting. They looked fine to me. Does anybody have any edits or corrections? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve those minutes? Okay, Bill, second. Martha, thanks. All in favor? Aye, great. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. And then finally, for setting up our next meeting, I'd go with 2 weeks from today, say the 8th, Tuesday, the 8th of February. Is that possible? Okay, that works for me.
Same time, John? Same time, 9:30 a.m.?
Yeah, we can do 9:30. My problem is I've got a standing 10 o'clock meeting.
You want to do 9?
Yeah, 9 o'clock on Tuesday, the 8th works for me. Does that work for everybody?
Well, no. It doesn't
Okay.
work for any of the department heads. I have a staff meeting at 8:45 that day.
Okay.
I can look to reschedule that.
Well, we're trying to accommodate folks who need to get going with their day. So I'm tied up that day. I could do Thursday, the 10th at 9 o'clock. Does that work?
Yes.
It doesn't work for me.
John, I'll reschedule the staff meeting.
Okay. All right. Let's then pencil in Tuesday, February 8th at 9 o'clock as our next meeting. And we'll go from there. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Okay, I appreciate everybody's involvement today. Motion to adjourn. Okay, Dan, second. Frank. All right, friends, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Adios. Bye-bye.